human mind has the power to mislead us or to distort reality. It is, after all, the filter through which we perceive the outside world. But there are times when incidents can't be explained away by saying it's all in the mind. We have two such stories tonight. One is from what many researchers now believe is Britain's most haunted castle. It's a ghost story that spans the centuries. First, we have a story about faith healing. Skeptics would say it's a prime example of patients persuading themselves that they're getting better, which is a plausible theory. But there's one problem with it. How can you explain faith healing when the patients are animals?
These pets and their owners are waiting at an animal clinic in Totnes, South Devon, but they will not be seen by a vet. Nikki Provost is an animal healer. Her patients are mainly pets which have already been treated by a conventional vet. But drugs and treatments don't always work, and coming here is often a last resort.
I don't really know what happens when I give healing. I just know it works, and I connect with the healing energy, let it come through my hand onto the animal, so I act as a channel, if you want.
This clinic is one of a number which have sprung up to cater for the growing band of animal lovers who believe that if spiritual healing can work for humans, why not for their pets?
We think Nikki can actually heal the animal a lot quicker than the vets.
I'm not a vet and I'm not medically trained. I don't think that I need to know what the diagnosis is or what is wrong with the animal. If after a healing session it's eating more, enjoys life more, that's good enough for me.
There's no way she'd still be alive if she went for conventional veterinary medicine. I know that. There's no way.
Animals aren't able to say whether they feel better or not, so it's easy for sentimentality to override the lack of scientific evidence on the subject. Whatever the owners believe, many vets remain highly skeptical. The vet's professional body, the British Veterinary Association, disapproves.
We're not happy with forms of healing that are not based on science, and as a veterinary surgeon who's been in practice for some 35 years, I am not aware of any case that has responded to spiritual healing.
But not all vets are unconvinced. This surgery in Potters Bar, Hertfordshire, actually allows one healer to run a clinic here every week. The senior partner refers patients personally.
I qualified about 22 years ago, and I used purely conventional techniques for about 10 years. But then I began to feel that a lot of conventional drugs had side effects and could even do harm to patients, and they weren't curing them. So I looked for other methods, such as healing, to help my patients.
Healer Charles Siddle started working at Richard Allport's surgery last year. He now sees between 3 and 7 patients a session.
I certainly couldn't say what Charles is doing or how he does it. I know that he's having a healing effect in some fashion. I know that many patients are helped by it. Of course, healing isn't a cure-all, but in many cases, Charles can do a great deal of good for animal patients.
But the bulk of Charles's work is done in the tough, big-money world of horse racing and show jumping, where only results count. His skills are attracting a valuable clientele. Orion Blaze is a potential show-jumping champion worth over £40,000. He is Trina Lewis's chance of fame in the show-jumping arena. 2 years ago, he tore a ligament.
I was devastated because he's my main horse. We thought he was going to go quite a long way. He'd just gone as a Grade A show jumper.
The vet recommended a long period of rest. That would have meant a loss of valuable competition time. Her friend suggested Charles Siddle.
As there was nothing to lose with it, we decided to go ahead and try. Charles came up, he ran his hands over the horse's leg, and having done that, he then asked me for £25, and I thought I'd been robbed. The next morning, I got the horse out of the stable, looked at his leg, and the leg had gone down. So I tacked him up and took him out for a ride, and he was fine. And we've gone on from there, from strength to strength.
So who is Charles Siddle? And what powers does he claim to possess?
I didn't know I was a healer until I was in my 50s. And I met a very famous vet called Buster Lloyd-Jones, who said that I could heal.
Charles has since healed hundreds of animals. Those involved in Charles's successful cases have no doubts about his abilities. Jessica is a top breeding racehorse. Both her first two foals have gone on to become valuable winners, Nipper Reed in particular.
It's Nipper Reed, clear by a very long way, 10 to 12 lengths, bold bit of front running for Nipper Reed.
Today, Jessica's worth around £20,000, but only 3 years ago, she was on the brink of death.
Someone has suggested using a healer 3 years ago. Complete and utter waste of time, wouldn't have even entered my head. I first noticed a lump on Jessica during sort of routine grooming, just over the top of her left eye, on the top of her eyelid. It wasn't very big, it was about a small pea size.
Here, Mandy. Take a look at this. Looks like a lump. Oh, it's probably nothing. Still, I better get the vet in to have a look.
So, what's the matter with Jessica, then?
There's a lump above her eye.
Jan called in her vet, Mark Sinnott. He's treated the Piper's horses for several years and knows Jessica well.
When I first examined Jessica, she had a couple of lumps involving her upper eyelid and also a few lumps under her throat and in her groin area. It's difficult to tell just by sort of initial first appearances. I mean, that's why we went on and did like further tests to try to ascertain, you know, what condition Jessica was suffering from.
So what's wrong with her then?
It's difficult to tell at the moment.
Well, she'll be all right to have another foal, won't she?
We'll just have to wait and see.
OK, darling.
But when the test results came through, the news was bad.
Hello?
Hi, Jan. I've got the results of the test through. I'm afraid Jessica's got equine lymphosarcoma.
What does that mean? Is she going to be all right?
No, Jan. Jessica's condition is terminal. She's got cancer.
Equine lymphosarcoma is a cancer affecting the white blood cells of horses, and it usually spreads to internal organs as well. And there is no known cure for it. And I discussed her case with other vets and since, and they're of the opinion that no horse has recovered from it.
But all was not lost. Jan Piper had been told about Charles Siddle's healing skills by a racing colleague.
Here, Graham. Someone gave me this. Take a look.
What?
It's an animal healer.
That's nice.
My husband's attitude towards healing was, when I suggested we call a healer in, was that it was a load of old poppycock and he didn't want nothing to do with it at all.
It's all nonsense.
Well, we've got nothing to lose. She's going to be put down anyway.
If it makes you feel better, give him a go.
I don't think the people who own Jessica believed that anything would happen.
Good evening. I'm Charles Siddle. You must be Mrs. Piper.
How do you do? Jessica's this way.
Good girl. It's all going to be better soon, don't worry.
I didn't understand what he would do. He was totally sort of relaxed with her and she was relaxed with him.
I can't remember at all how long I was in the actual stable with her.
He was laying his hands all over her and I'd never seen anything like that before, and Jessica didn't seem to mind.
She'll be all right now. Probably she'll be tired, but tomorrow she'll be fine.
Well, thanks for coming anyway.
When Charles left, I mean, Jessica looked no different. And I told my husband he was leaving and he just laughed and said that was a total waste of time.
Well, that's it, old girl. I've tried everything now.
When I left the stable, I knew Jessica would be all right.
The next morning, Jan was in for a surprise.
Jan! Jan!
What?
You won't believe it. Jessica's knocking at the door for food.
Jessica? It can't be Jessica. She hasn't eaten in weeks. Jessica! Try her on some hay first, see if she'll eat it.
Yeah?
I couldn't believe it was the same horse. She was well. She was hungry.
It's amazing. I can't believe it. She just looks so much better.
She was just a completely different horse, and I do put it all down. Well, I have to put it all down to what Charles did.
Jessica made a complete recovery, and the following year gave birth to Frank, who already shows racing promise. Today, Jessica is at the stud farm, hoping to conceive another in her line of winners.
By all the laws of veterinary medicine, Jessica should be dead by now, but she's still walking around happy in the field with a foal, and this is just something that we cannot explain.
And you might be pleased to know that animal healing has now been given the seal of approval by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, which allows healers to lay hands on animals under the care of a qualified vet. Our ancient and historic monuments often have ancient and historic ghosts to go with them. You can even find them listed in the guidebooks. So far, so good for the tourist business. Our story tonight concerns one such historic site. The occasional tourist would leave terrified after a brief encounter with the supernatural, but that could always be put down to an overheated imagination. But what was more perplexing was the behavior of the overnight visitors, level-headed friends of the family. They often refused point-blank ever to spend another night in the place. They were seeing something that wasn't in the guidebooks. They were seeing the wrong ghost.
Muncaster Castle. Since 1325, it has stood on the northwest coast of England, built to guard the ancient trade routes going south from Carlisle and to watch for invaders coming in from the Irish Sea. The Pennington family have been the lords of Muncaster since the 13th century, when Alan de Penetone was granted the lands of Muncaster by King John. In recent years, the family and friends have been plagued by strange happenings within the walls. Doors open and shut of their own accord. Unknown footsteps walk the corridors. Patrick Gordon Duff Pennington has lived at the castle since he married into the family, but even he feels uncomfortable at times.
Going up in the winter, between the back door and my office, come snow, come hail or shine, every night footsteps used to follow me in the dark in the winter, and I didn't like it one little bit. And the dogs don't like it much either. I've always thought this house was a fairly normal house, but just lately it's become extremely strange.
Horticulturalist Alan Clark also had a bad experience at Muncaster.
Had a quick look outside. Nobody there at all. I then found it was quite difficult even to shut the door.
But things didn't stop there for Alan Clark that night.
You hear the expression of the hair stands on the back of your neck, stands up on the back of your neck. And I never really believed it. But this really did sort of happen.
Until now, the hauntings at Muncaster have been blamed on the spirit of Tom Skelton, otherwise known as Tom Fool. He was the jester at the castle in the 16th century, and his portrait now hangs in one of the corridors of the castle. By all accounts, Tom Fool had a sadistic sense of humour.
He used to sit underneath the chestnut tree that's outside this front door still, which is 600 years old. And when you came and asked the way back to London, if he didn't like the look of you, he pointed you down to the quicksand instead of over the ford.
We'll never know if Tom Skelton really did send travellers to their deaths in the sands, but one thing is true. Just below the castle, along the River Esk, quicksands do appear at low tide. Legend states that Tom was also responsible for the gruesome murder of a carpenter within the castle grounds, an act he carried out to win favour with his master, Sir William Pennington. Tom Fool's presence pervades the castle. It's at its most disquieting by his macabre portrait. A scowling Tom Fool, he stands beside his will, a document that predicts his own death by drowning. One tourist had a frightening experience while looking at the painting.
He's an evil-looking man, isn't he?
She was convinced that she'd heard footsteps on stone, a claim that surprised the local investigator into the hauntings.
When I interviewed her, sometime after the experience, I pointed out to her that the stairs and the corridor were indeed fully carpeted. And she'd never actually realised this, even after the experience, and she'd thought that she'd had a strange experience. She'd never actually made the connection between the stone footsteps and the fact that that wing of the castle is fully carpeted.
The tales of Tom Fool and a headless carpenter make for a good ghost story. But can all the bumps and bangs in the castle really be attributed to a 16th century jester? More recent incidents seem to have nothing to do with Tom Fool. More disturbing than anything that's gone before, these experiences centre on this room in the castle, the tapestry room. James Cartland is an archivist and a family friend of the Penningtons. In the early 80s, he was invited to stay at Muncaster. His hosts put him up in the tapestry room, in a wing of the castle now little used.
I'd heard this sort of strange, difficult to describe it. It was a sort of, as if somebody was talking, but muttering, sort of strange sound. I can't really explain it. I stuck my head up the chimney. I thought, well, it might be the wind in the chimney, but it never is. It was a very, very quiet night, very frosty and quiet. I was the only person in that wing of the castle, so there was nobody else there to make a noise. Absolutely the only person. Everybody else was at the other end. And went back into the room, and it was still going on. And it was more audible by then. I mean, it was definitely a child crying and somebody talking to it, as if a child was ill or something like that. I got back into bed. I never slept a wink. Terrible night.
Unknown to James Cartland, a teenage girl had stayed with her mother at the castle a year earlier. Now a trainee solicitor, she prefers to remain anonymous, but her experience is recreated by actors. The late Lord Carlisle had a similar experience, which he recounted to an ex-curator at the castle.
Lord Carlisle told me that he'd only once stayed in Muncaster, and that time he'd been in the tapestry room. And he'd woken up in the middle of the night with the sound of a baby crying in the room, and there was no baby in the room. He said he's never been more terrified in his life. And he was a man who got the MC in the last war, so he wasn't a man who was easily frightened. But he said nothing would get him to stay in Muncaster again. That was one thing that was quite certain.
No one testimony is proof that Muncaster is haunted, but to investigators, these accounts over a long time add up to an impressive case.
Muncaster not only makes the grade with the witnesses' testimonies, it far surpasses the level of criteria that you're looking for, which basically revolves around the correlation of stories over a vast period of time, or even at the same time if you had a collective experience. Without prior knowledge, that's the key. The only other way you could explain it would be mass collusion, and on that scale, spanning decades, from people that that no way ever met each other.
So if Muncaster is haunted, who or what is doing it? In particular, who were the children said to be crying in the tapestry room? It was James Cartland who may have stumbled upon the answer.
I came across some old plans and I discovered that when the castle was altered in the middle of the 19th century, the room, the tapestry room, had been part of the old nurseries, and that those rooms had been cut up or altered in some way. And so I immediately thought, my goodness, those children lived in those rooms. They were the nurseries. It's rather unnerving.
Could the tapestry room be haunted by the cries of children? Certainly the Pennington family had their share of tragedy in the 19th century. Gamel Augustus, the third Lord of Muncaster, lost his only child, Margaret, when she was 11 years old. She was buried in the family church, just a short walk from the castle. Phillida Pennington doesn't know how her distant relative died, nor is she certain that Margaret slept in the tapestry room where the children's cries can now be heard. But she does remember the words of Annie Preston, whose family worked at the castle in Gamel's time.
Annie Preston, who was a lady who lived in the village, who died last year, aged 92, told me that her grandfather put Margaret Elizabeth, the daughter of Gamel, Lord Muncaster, into the family tomb. She was the last person to be put in there. And also, he said that she had screaming fits before she died.
As a result of these inexplicable events, Muncaster Castle now finds itself catapulted onto Britain's most haunted list. So much so that the only guests willing to spend the night in the tapestry room nowadays are paranormal investigators. Good night.